In the years following the brief but electrifying gold rushes of the 1850s and early 1860s, British Columbia stood impoverished and increasingly uncertain of its future. The gold was largely gone. The saloons and mining camps were fading into ghost towns. Roads cut hastily through the wilderness were crumbling, and the newly united colony, amalgamated with Vancouver Island in 1866, was burdened by mounting debts. By 1870, the colony was fiscally hollow and politically exhausted, writes historian Gene Barman in The West Beyond the West, capturing the stark reality that faced the colony's residents. As revenues declined and London grew apathetic, many in British Columbia began to ask the most fundamental question of all: what would this colony become? There were three clear answers, three diverging paths through the fog. One was to remain a British colony, or perhaps to emerge as an independent dominion on its own. The second, more radical, was annexation by the United States. And the third was a leap of faith, to join the new Canadian Confederation to the east, a fragile experiment born in 1867. These options were not abstract exercises in constitutional theory. They were existential lifelines debated in colonial newspapers, barrooms, and legislative chambers with an urgency born of desperation. Barman notes that internal and external forces denied annexation, and colonial politics, patriarchal ties, and Ottawa's offer converged in union. But before union, there was debate, fierce, uncertain, and full of consequences.
British Columbia faced three possibilities in the late 1860s when the questions were coming hot and furious about what would happen for the future. Now, there were many different points of view that were being expressed, and the press was prominent, and it was very prominent in political circles and in financial circles and business circles as well. Well, the first thing, of course, as a possibility would be to, do nothing, to remain a proud colony within the British Empire, and possibly to move towards its own separate dominion status, not joining Canada, but remaining a British North American colony and subsequently a dominion. I mean, we have an example of that in Newfoundland until 1949. So the second possibility, of course, was to join the United States. It seemed natural on account of trade, account of British Columbia's difficult financial circumstances, where they would enter to the United States Union for commercial benefits, to say nothing of American defense capabilities. Naturally, of course, Indian policy would change dramatically, but perhaps there wasn't a great deal of concern given to them at the time about protection of Indian rights. And the third one, of course, was to join Canada. And even though there was a great stretch of land between the Continental Divide and the Lake of the Woods, nonetheless, the British Columbians did not see this as a necessary impediment. They could get a cart road across that. They didn't see that as a problem. The Hudson Bay Company would be agreeable to that. So the concept of a British Columbia, British North America Union becomes a very important thing. And the number of persons coming to settle in British Columbia were prominent Confederationalists, and the prominent persons running the British Columbia colony were akin to them and thought that this was a likely thing because nationhood, alliance with the monarchy, membership in the British Empire would be a good counterweight to the United States. So those are the three possibilities.
To many conservative voices in Victoria and New Westminster, the notion of remaining a British colony was the most honorable course. Loyalty to the Crown had long been part of British Columbia's identity. The colonial elite, particularly former Hudson's Bay Company men, saw continued imperial oversight as the surest path to cultural stability. British law, British institutions, and British prestige, they argued, were worth preserving. But London's interest in her Pacific outpost was waning. As Judge Henry Creese lamented in 1867, "England is sick of her colonies. To be a colonist, though of the governing class, is to lose caste the moment you become a bona fide settler." The imperial dream, once gilded with missionary zeal and commercial opportunity, now felt remote and irrelevant. London did not want another fiscal liability on its hands, certainly not one 8,000 kilometers away, wedged between mountains and ocean, with no viable economy and a shrinking population. Some, dreaming more boldly, or more recklessly, imagined British Columbia as a self-governing dominion, or even an independent Pacific nation. But the fantasy of a sovereign BC, with a population barely above 40,000, and a government drowning in red ink, collapsed under scrutiny. As Barman observes, the colony lacked the fiscal resources, population base, and international clout to pursue independence seriously. Independence, while romantic, was a luxury they could not afford. If loyalty to Britain was nostalgic and independence implausible, then what of the American option? In the years immediately following the Civil War, the United States surged with confidence. Its appetite for expansion remained voracious, and its influence was already felt in British Columbia. American prospectors had flooded the Fraser Canyon and Caribou gold fields. San Francisco was far closer than Ottawa, and many British Columbians had personal and commercial ties with their southern neighbors. Washington's annexationist mood was unmistakable. Secretary of State William H. Seward's purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867 was more than a strategic coup. It was a signal. Historian Walter Sage describes it as a turning point in British Columbia's political consciousness, forcing colonial leaders to reckon with the very real prospect of being swallowed by manifest destiny. There were local voices, too, who considered annexation a viable path. Some Victoria merchants and Vancouver Island settlers argued that economic survival lay in joining the United States. British Columbia's governor, Anthony Musgrave, received petitions advocating union with Washington. Even John Sebastian Helmeken, though later a Confederation negotiator, admitted darkly, ultimately, this colony will be absorbed by the United States. The U.S. was industrializing rapidly, building railways, issuing coin, and offering a market the struggling colony could not ignore. But fears loomed large. Annexation might bring prosperity, but at what cost? British Columbians, particularly those steeped in British institutions and legal traditions, worried about losing their cultural identity. The Americans were embroiled in post-Civil War Reconstruction, and their treatment of indigenous peoples and newly annexed territories raised ethical and legal concerns. Barman notes that the specter of American racial politics and governance practices alarmed many, particularly those who saw the United States as unstable and aggressive. Though attractive on paper, American annexation never gained the broad political traction needed to become a serious contender. Then there was Canada, a new dominion birthed on July 1, 1867 by the British North American Act. For many in British Columbia, Canada seemed distant, undeveloped, and unproven. It was a confederation of former British colonies in the east, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Quebec, bound by political compromise more than a shared vision. Yet for others, Canada represented hope, a way to remain British while gaining autonomy and fiscal relief. More importantly, it offered something no one else could: a railway, a transcontinental promise, the iron road that would tie the Pacific to the Atlantic and break the colony's crushing isolation. Nothing could happen until Canada acquired Rupert's Land. This was done, and an administration projected for the new province of Manitoba completed the land link. Macdonald's vision of a sea-to-sea country could be secured. The Confederation League, led by dynamic figures like Armand de Cosmo, Robert Bevan, and John Robson, pushed hard for union with Canada. De Cosmo, ever the populist, believed that Confederation would bring responsible government, economic development, and social progress. He thundered in the press and in the legislative halls, casting Canada as a rising star and British Columbia as a backward outpost that could not afford to be left behind. The railway, he insisted, would not only bring settlers and commerce, but bind British Columbia to the national destiny of a transcontinental Canada. Yet opposition remained. Critics feared that Ottawa would ignore Western needs in favor of Eastern interests. Many wondered whether Canadian promises were credible. Looking back, the roads not taken reveal as much as the path chosen. Remaining a British colony would likely have left BC adrift in a rapidly changing geopolitical sea. American annexation may have brought economic vigor, but at the expense of legal continuity and cultural independence. In choosing Canada, British Columbia could preserve its British character while gaining the infrastructure, representation, and financial stability it so desperately needed. Gene Barman captured the decision best. It was a calculated act, not a passionate one, but it saved the colony. In doing so, it gave shape to the nation that would stretch, as the motto reads, Amer jusqu'à ad mer, from sea to sea. Join us for Part 8 of the Canada History Society's 20-part series as we explore in more detail colony or independence, status quo or autonomy.